Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet. All Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto asset.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorn, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. Bitcoin, not zero. And we have a great episode for you today. David Bailey, CEO, founder of BTC Inc. That's the Bitcoin conference and Bitcoin magazine. He's coming back on the show to talk about everything around the Trump inauguration, his recent phone call from President Trump, and what he expects for crypto and digital asset regulation in this new administration, but also his thoughts on the potential creation of a strategic national digital asset stockpile. What about the strategic Bitcoin reserve? We'll talk with David a lot about that. And we have a great conversation with our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, we're going to talk about DeepSeek, the Fed, the future outlook for markets broadly in technology, but also Bitcoin and digital assets. A great conversation with Beimnet, a little bit longer than usual, but a very good one I know you'll like. Before we get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Really great episode this week, so let's just get right into it. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome back to Galaxy Brands.
Thanks for having me.
I think this might be the first one live back in the office that we've actually sat. Maybe it was like two weeks ago. I think we might have done one but I've been traveling. And my gosh, I get back to the office and we have just an absolute shock of a market week this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am, of course, referring to the launch of DeepSeek AI, this Chinese-based LLM model.
Yeah.
That is apparently an order of magnitude more efficient than previous models or something like that. Massive market shakeup on Monday.
Yeah.
Equity markets off huge, big name like AI stocks down huge. It's sort of settled now. What was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it highlighted kind of just how much exuberance there was in AI. Going back to, the DeepSeek claims that were really notable was, they claimed to have done it with about $5 million in spend.
Dollars.
Versus like all the companies in the US that are spending tens of billions of dollars. And so, the market really grew concerned about, compute and how much compute was actually needed to get to kind of the ultimate stage of
whatever
of
the
AI.
promised land is for
exactly.
AI. Yeah.
And so, those concerns, trickled into the market at very stretched valuations, and it basically forced folks to reassess. And I would also say the magnitude of positioning, in AI names, AI services, power, et cetera, was it's pretty close to like a 10 out of 10. Let's put it that way.
Everyone
was long.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, we spoke about it, on last week's podcast, like the power basket and nuclear stocks were up like, over 10 to 20%. Nuclear was up 20% to start the year.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and these companies are like pre-revenue, like it's all based on, the forward expectations of power consumption. The high level story is basically power needs have grown like next to nothing over the past like couple of decades, and they're expected to grow at like 10 to 20 to potentially even 30%, and that was what was baked into the stocks. And so now, if you actually need a lot less compute, that means you need a lot less power, and so a lot of names that were associated with this AI infrastructure took a hit.
Yeah.
And there's also just kind of the dynamics that are at play in the market now, which is like, you have all these levered ETFs, the options positioning, et cetera. And so, these moves tend to get exacerbated. So that's a little bit more technical rather than fundamental. But you got kind of that sweet setup where, positioning was stretched and the fundamentals changed. And then the technicals took over. So you had a pretty big correction. NASDAQ overnight dropped as much as 5% before rebounding. And that obviously trickled into other risk assets like Bitcoin. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
For this one segment of the economy and markets. I would say though that kind of the broader structural things separate from AI are still intact. Like DJT is still going to deregulate like crazy. The Fed is probably not going to be hawkish or that hawkish on a go-forward basis. And, U.S. exceptionalism in all things is still prevalent.
Right.
And so that's why you saw, even on that down day, like I'm pretty sure
It's like record inflows, like dip buying and stuff too.
300 of the 500 names in the S&P were actually up.
Yeah.
Right. And so even though the index was down, right, like you had the rest of the companies actually do okay. But the issue now is, going back to some of the technical aspects, is, these Magnificent Seven names contribute so much of a percentage of the overall index that when those names drop, that basically means the index has to drop.
Yeah.
Right.
For
and
sure.
so, there's a lot of things at play, and I think the market's still kind of digesting, what the forward looks like, and cooler heads are now prevailing, and I think you'll see that reinforced today with Meta reporting earnings and Microsoft as well. I think folks will be very eager to kind of see what those CEOs say about their expected R&D budgets for this year.
Right.
I think most likely
You think you're going to hear the word Jevons paradox?
Maybe, but most likely they will reiterate that they're still going to spend.
Yeah.
And there's also a decent argument to be made that if your basically demand is going to get pulled forward, because it means that you can get to the end state of AI, general intelligence, etc., sooner.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
that's one of the questions.
And like, it's one of those things that it could be a winner take all kind of market, and so you want to invest more aggressively, arguably.
It's interesting, because the one of the sort of humors of watching the market reaction, which makes a lot of sense given the valuations of a lot of those companies and the expectations of spending and how much they would need from power, and obviously the picks and shovels around them. But one of the arguments is like, wait a second, you're telling me that like it could be much more efficient and we could go faster? Isn't that good for everyone, including those big names? The other thing, it also assumes that there's some end state, that there is actually like, you get to like AGI and now like you stop buying chips, building data centers, and most people don't believe that. So like, it's actually like, isn't it just the same thing? I think it's one of the things that it highlighted for me, though, was especially in an economy and a world so driven by technology innovation, and which is likely to continue probably forever to be driven by that. The chance, the likelihood even of black swan tech innovation impact on the market, right? Because I think on a long enough time frame, we're likely to get step function innovations for all of history, right? So like the idea that something can be invented or discovered from a technology standpoint is something that markets just constantly have to think about, even probably more so. Quantum comes to mind as well. If somebody has a breakthrough in quantum.
I think what this whole episode really underscored to me was that the variability about future outcomes is really like way greater than people actually think. And so you have to price in like a pretty substantial level of uncertainty. Right. And right now, markets, or before this event, markets were priced to perfection, right? As if we kind of knew more about these unknown variables than we actually did. And so I think it really forces people to do their homework and kind of be a little bit more humble about kind of the state of what the state of the world is going to look like 5 years out, 10 years out, et cetera. And that should mean, in theory, I think that means lower valuations. In practice, I'm not so sure as to how the markets develop. Obviously, there are other things that move the market, and so I sit here relatively humbled by the occurrences of the weekend. But in theory, it's like like you had a market that was totally off sides, and when there's a rational exuberance, you tend to see like multiple sigma events happen.
Right.
And on a go forward basis, like you were saying, like it's totally possible, right? Like, one of the companies that like the moment like ChatGPT came out, there's a ton of names that just nuked.
Right.
Because it was like,
I mean, there
Holy
was
shit.
customer service companies
Yep.
and like things that did like anything kind of like internet customer service support, let alone like developers. And
Yes,
I mean, yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's really kind of what I'm harping on right now is like clearly AI is moving faster than we expected, right? And what does that mean for like the real world in terms of like jobs, for example, and how soon jobs are likely to go away? Everything from lawyers to customer service people to
even like diagnosing
doctors. Yeah, like you put the whole genome and analyze it
and look
all
at the picture of the X-ray.
Right, yeah,
it starts to get yeah.
all of the above. And so I think the pace of that evolution is one, the pace is dynamic as well.
That's true.
as,
It goes in
you know,
fits and starts, it
yes.
seems. But it does, I agree with you, though. It does feel faster than expected. Like even in 2019 or 2020, like data centers weren't that good of a business.
Yeah.
Right? The people weren't investing them. I mean, there's some big hyperscalers that were small companies then. And so it's like, and now it feels like it's going to be 1,000 times bigger than it is now, right? Like it's like, it does feel like we've gotten a lot faster. Even like, remember there was the one of the sort of early like joke tests on the internet for how good AI was if it could make that video of Will Smith eating spaghetti. Do you remember?
No,
and
I
it was
don't,
like
but-
really, really bad, like just like 3 or 4 years ago.
And now-
he sort of like, it was all janky and the
Yeah.
spaghetti's flying. And now it's like really good in
Yeah.
just a couple years. And now you see all these, I mean, now there's just people making memes that look real that are good, right? I mean, it's like, it's not just like in some laboratory either. It's frankly like pretty widely accessible already.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. If you told me a couple years ago.
Which makes me think like the productivity growth in the U.S. is really, and globally is going to pick up a ton.
Yeah. Yeah. That's maybe an optimistic thing. It's like not that necessarily every job goes away. I actually did an episode with our friend Nick Carter like 6 months ago, who was a big investor in a major hyperscaler. And I think we titled the episode was called like "Every Job is Going Away Because of AI" or something. But maybe it's also, hopefully, it's also productivity gains for the existing jobs, and that we grow our
Yes.
GDP, and that it's not right. Yeah.
But ultimately, like you're headed to a lot less employment. I'm pretty sure.
And by the way, that's what Altman and a lot of these people are saying and worried about, right? That's why Sam Altman, as an example, has been calling for like a UBI in response
You
to
have
this
to
forever.
go to UBI. Like we need to start talking about it now, and like,
Oh man.
it's coming.
All right, before we go, we could talk on and on about this, but let's talk a little bit. We're usually we wait to record this episode after Jay Powell comes out and gives comments following the FOMC meeting. For scheduling reasons, we're recording this a couple hours before then. But what is you said before? We expect the Fed to mostly be cutting over time or mostly dovish. Do we expect anything? I think markets are pricing in basically zero cut at all today.
Correct.
So just flat, like a cautious pause.
To use a sports analogy, I think Powell is going to throw a fastball right down the middle today. There are going to be basically no shocks to the market. In terms of just like one market's anecdote to think about, the implied move on Treasury futures is the lowest it's been in 3 years.
Yeah.
For an FOMC event.
Expecting basically no volatility.
Well,
or the smallest amount in
correct.
3 years. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it might even realize less than
Right.
implied.
Right.
And so like that's kind of where the market is at. In terms of the data we've had since last FOMC, the job data has been a bit stronger. The inflation stuff has been relatively tame. And so, on the data front, not much has really changed to impact the Fed's messaging. In terms of Trump policies, they've been slowly rolled out over the past couple of weeks. Or I guess he's only been president for a week.
Feels longer already, but yes. A lot of news.
Lot of news, but again, it's still tough to forecast out the implications of what he's doing.
Stuff's still just barely getting going.
And the government moves slowly and like spending and tax policy.
I think Treasury Secretary now Besson was only confirmed on Monday.
Correct.
So just literally getting into the office.
Yeah. So there's still a long ways away, and so given that level of uncertainty, the Fed is going to stick to their guns and say they're going to be data dependent, and that that a couple of cuts this year are probably still likely, and the market's probably not going to react much to it. And honestly, I think the market really doesn't care what Powell has to say right now. It's literally all about Meta and Microsoft
Yeah,
today.
the big tech earnings.
Big tech earnings.
Yeah, and what they say about DeepSeek and AI spending.
Correct. Those are the only things that matter.
Okay, and then last question. During that pretty big wipeout, I think in absolute terms, it was one of the biggest drops in history.
Yeah,
on Monday,
$500 to $600 billion
Yeah.
out of Nvidia, and
a lot of the we're sort of flat. Like the hysteria, at least from Monday, has subsided. But cryptos came down as well. Bitcoin, I think, traded in like the 98K range overnight that night. But again, it's at our block clock is currently needs to
right
be
around
reset up.
102 here.
101, 102. It's basically holding. The rest of crypto not doing great. Like not horrible. I mean, the big names mostly okay-ish, but the meme coins, it seems like the air has been sucked right out of the meme coin complex.
Yeah.
How do you think about Bitcoin and I don't know in the near medium term in general? I mean, it's mostly holding up here.
Yeah,
which is positive.
You know, I think Bitcoin, like, you just have to keep thinking about like how much money there is in the world, and are people bought into the 2% thesis or 1% portfolio thesis? And I think a ton of real money is bought into that thesis, and so you're still in a year where you're going to continue to see inflows from institutional types. You're going to see inflows from Sailor probably on an ongoing basis. And so I think the path is probably a little less bumpy than what we've had in the past, which shows maturity, but also shows, you know, kind of the scale of Bitcoin now being worth $2 trillion. Like it's much harder to move it up and down 10%.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, I think Bitcoin, you know, will continue to trade okay. I think 92K is strong support, right? And 108, 109 is a strong resistance. And, you know, I think a break of either of those levels, you know, we'll probably see continuation.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think you kind of have to treat it as a range trade until it's not. Now, that's kind of my view on Bitcoin. With the rest of the complex, I think, you know, what really kind of set the tone for that complex is kind of the Trump token launch a couple weekends ago. And, you know, you saw the price reaction when the token launched. Every token dumped, with the exception of like Bitcoin, basically.
Yeah, people were selling to go buy it, and then
Yeah.
it sucked the liquidity
But
right out of it.
It's kind of one of those moments where you go from like having cognitive dissonance about like what alts are and what these tokens are and the valuations, to like being like, holy shit, this is just a
This guy
huge
he can launch one, and it can go to 80 billion FDV in 5
dump,
minutes.
and then dump after as
Yeah,
well.
right.
And it's just a meme, and you know, like that reality is kind of setting in a ton. And the issue is, it's just like I don't know where I heard the stat, but you know, I think there's something like 1 million new tokens launched a day or a week.
Yeah.
And so the amount of sheer supply in the market of memes
lot.
and tokens is a lot. The existing unlock schedules of tokens and the existing emissions is a ton. In terms of flow that we see here on the desk, like we get shopped a ton of paper at pretty meaningful discounts. And so, you know, the market is awash with crypto token supply. And, you know, this is kind of one of those things where, like, if you think about crypto, prior to this administration, it was all about future expectations of what the world will look like.
Regulatory changes, and yeah.
But
Those are
like,
still coming.
Once you get those, though, it's like you got to prove that you can last.
Now
and
it actually
like,
has to deliver.
generate revenue.
Right.
And crypto's always been like, you always want to be pre-product. Like
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
about the hope, but
It's like
now
that,
it's like, show me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's right.
And in a show me market where you still have a ton of tokens worth billions of dollars, it's like,
Right.
like it's time to put up or shut up
That's
in
right.
a lot of situations. And so, you know, like there's a lot of folks, you know, just thinking about that kind of
Now
construct.
you really have to deliver product and value now. It
Yeah,
can't
and
just be
so-
like, oh no, we tried to, but we had a government's boot on our neck. But now
Yeah.
if the pathway is lifted or made available to you, now it's like, well, all right, go build the thing you promised.
Yeah. And then you're also just having like an insane amount of like product launches now that the ETFs are
Yeah.
more likely,
Tons.
etc. And some of these things, like there was a provider that, was launching like a levered Melania token, and there's Litecoin ETFs, and a lot of stuff that is going to be a tough sell to like an institutional investor, for example. And so, it's getting to a place that can be a little cringe at times. Just speaking, honestly.
Yeah.
And it makes people, less inclined to, put money to work in some of this stuff.
Yeah, I do think there's a reckoning that needs to come with where you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And I would say the Bitcoin's relative performance and absolute performance really show
insanely impressive.
Very impressive. The
Very
market is
impressive.
looking at Bitcoin in particular, and some other big names generally, but Bitcoin the most notably as having value and holding it there.
Yeah, I mean,
not sure about all this other stuff. But
realistically, like you had the NASDAQ implode, and Bitcoin went from 105 to 98 and settled around above 100.
yeah,
Right. And so if you told me NVIDIA would be down 17% on a day, I'd tell you Bitcoin's down 10 at least.
At least. Maybe more.
Right.
Maybe worse. You'd think it might be like people say for a long time that it was effectively high beta tech. So should we actually be down or up more? I mean, so I agree. Very impressive.
And so I think you're just moving along the curve, right? Like I fundamentally still think Bitcoin's a risk asset, and if S&P's down 5, like nothing is safe.
Yeah.
But I think over time, what you're starting to see with like a broader institutional investor base is that the kind of shift to it being more of a store of value, monetary debasement hedge, et cetera. And so you're seeing Bitcoin's characteristics morph into kind of our digital gold kind of narrative. And so I think that's partly why you're seeing the price action that you are. But it's also like this stuff is every day being put into portfolios that are not as fickle, right? Going from weak hands to strong hands, right? Like when Saylor buys Bitcoin, he's not selling it, right?
Yeah, and he's not buying alts with it.
He's
right?
not correct. And
ETF buyers or RIAs or wealth management firms, et cetera, yeah.
Right. And so like over time that should mean that like it'll continue to kind of trickle upwards, and that's kind of the hope.
That's the thesis.
That is the thesis. And the other thing that with this dynamic that changes things and with the ETF in general is that less money flows from Bitcoin to alts, right? When people feel like going out the risk curve.
That's right.
Right. And so
it dampens the intra-crypto cyclicality. Is
correct.
We predicted this, you and I. We talked about this back in February and March.
Yes. And so you'll see on a continued basis more dispersion between Bitcoin and kind of the rest of the assets in the space because, Bitcoin's finding its niche in a lot of great portfolios.
Right.
And so, it's really hard. I mean, just think about this, right? We've been making this argument for as long as I've been at this firm, but Bitcoin fundamentally is an asset in a portfolio that not only improves your return profile, but also improves your risk-adjusted returns, right? It lowers the vol of your portfolio. And so how can any risk manager in the world in this current state of Bitcoin where it's super liquid, and tons of instruments, institutional acceptance, you got Larry Fink on TV about it. Like, how can you ignore something that when you stick it into a model portfolio spits out an output that you can't ignore? Like
you can't do it.
And so, as that argument continues to gain more traction, I think you'll just continue to see more institutional adoption.
All right, that was a great one. Great rip here, Bim. My friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's go now to our guest, David Bailey, founder, CEO of BTC Inc. David, welcome back to Galaxy Brains.
Yeah, what's up, Alex? Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you were first on and last on this show right before the Bitcoin conference, after it had been announced that
how far we've come, man.
I know. Then candidate, now President Donald Trump was going to speak at the Bitcoin conference. That ended up being epic. How epic was that, by the way? We talked before it happened, but from your perspective, I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was cool to be a part of. And, Yeah, man, it's all blur. It's all whirlwind. I don't know. I mean, we were just running and gunning the whole time, and I feel like we've been running and gunning since. But yeah, to see it go from there all the way to election night to now to be in the office and to see the first legislature, I guess, executive orders come down, and for Ross Ulbricht to be pardoned. I mean, dude, what a timeline.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, I was laughing at how jumpy Bitcoin Twitter was after President Trump's inauguration a week ago. The slogan was "Free Ross Day One." He had tweeted it, let alone said that he would commute Ross's sentence. By the way, he did end up doing a full and unconditional pardon. It didn't happen in the first 12 hours, and some of Bitcoin Twitter was, I mean, I saw people saying promises not kept, right? It did happen by relatively early in the evening on the first full day in office on that Tuesday, the 21st. What was it like? You've known Ross's mom for a long time. I remember being there at that first Bitcoin conference in San Francisco when you guys had that audio tape of Ross. Just on from your perspective, how did that feel seeing Ross walk out of prison?
Oh man, it's a surreal thing. I actually kind of felt like the day after, like we've been fighting for Ross to get out of prison for so long. Like Free Ross has been such a mantra of this space that like after he was freed, I was like sitting around the next day, like, okay, now what? Like now what do we care about? You know? So yeah, no, I mean it's surreal. And first off, the photo of him out of prison, like I've seen people joking about how he looks younger than Brian Johnson, but like it is not an exaggeration. The guy looks like in his prime, and you know, just the absolute joy of being freed. And if you listen to that recording that we did with him from prison, the whole premise of his I don't know what you call it, a speech, was that like you don't know what it's like to lose your freedom until you've lost it, and then but like the caveat to that is like you also don't know like what it's like to get your freedom back once you've lost it. And so I'm sure like that was just an amazing moment, and for his mom. And when I talked to the president yesterday, I mean that was one of the main things we talked about was Ross, and yeah, I feel like, dude, I was definitely sweating bullets when he wasn't pardoned right away, because it's like, okay, like here we go, like it was David a chump, and like am I about to have like 100,000 people burning me at the stake? And so I was a little bit nervous, but I mean every person I was talking to was like, it's going to be imminent, it's imminent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I felt like too that felt like one of the first things that he was going to do, and it ended up for that the crypto and libertarian communities cared about. And it was one of the first things that he did, by the way, to be clear. It was very early in his presidency.
No, I think it counts as day one. And I think like even if he had done it by Friday, like I felt like week one was like day one. Like his schedule is so insane. I mean, like he literally is just being like escorted from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, and it's just like it's actually kind of shocking that our stuff got prioritized to get done in the first couple of days, considering like how many things he has on his plate the first week.
I agree. I would have thought week one would have been a promise kept, to be clear. But I also saw that as something that was easier to do. A presidential commutation or pardon how many did Biden do? Like 7,500? Like there's a template form for it, right? So it's not like, and I saw that as sort of a bellwether for if he was going to deliver on these promises. So yeah, if he didn't, that would be a very bad signal. Now, if he did, it didn't mean everything else that we wanted would also happen, but it would be like, okay, and of course he did, though. He did. And yeah, the photo with Ross with that plant, something about that plant, the sign of life, like this guy had not given up. I thought it was really impressive. And to be clear, like there's a range of opinions on Ross, but one that I know I hold firmly is that a double life sentence plus 40 years for no violent crime conviction doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and dude, I thinking back to all these years knowing Lynn, I mean, I think the first time I met Lynn was like 2014, and I always told her like one day the Bitcoin community will get big enough that like we will get Ross out. Like one day we will get there, and I believed it, but it was also like aspirational of like one day in the future. And it's like now that we've gotten to the point where like literally like our homies that like take a bullet for the team, like we can go back and we can like no man left behind. Like that's like so cool and so dope that we as an industry are able to defend ourselves and protect ourselves. And like that's powerful. So anyway.
Yeah, it was a show of force. It was. Yeah. But then, okay, so then 2 days later, the president did keep another promise. He issued a wide-ranging executive order called Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. I won't necessarily, I can, but I won't like sort of read through everything. But I would point out that it's sort of structured as 3 sections. The top, as with many executive orders, outlines national priorities, right? So it says, like, we are going to promote this technology and related technology across all sectors of the economy, including by, and then a list of several things they're going to do to promote them, sort of goals of the government. One of them is to protect access to public blockchains, including for miners and validators, including for software developers to be able to deploy and develop software, which I thought was a great inclusion, and to maintain self-custody. Again, these are goals of the government. This is sort of the top of the order, instructing what the next section of the order, when they do what he's asking, what they need to be keeping in mind. And then the next section is that presidential working group chaired by David Sachs that, among other things, again, by the way, I didn't include this, but regulatory clarity and access, fair and open access to banking. There's plenty of good stuff in here. But one of the things that I know Bitcoin Twitter has been talking about a lot was the national digital asset stockpile. So the presidential working group is going to evaluate the potential creation of such a stockpile, potentially deriving from coins they already seized, potentially. Very open-ended language, which I think, by the way, is positive. Like they can, they got to figure this thing out. What's your take on that part of the order?
So, I think in general, the reaction to the order, the negativity was really like 2 things. One is the price didn't go up post this EO, which is like, okay, well that's a tough anchor to deal with. And 2, the choice to use the language digital assets instead of Bitcoin, which was a very intentional decision for the administration to maintain objectivity and to not be viewed as picking winners and losers, and like to approach it in a methodical way. So I think that that's actually like the right way for them to handle it. But I think for the most of our, like the Bitcoin community that like just views everything else as scams, that like, they hate the word digital assets to begin with. Like, but I think in general, like Bitcoin is a digital asset. And I think we need to co-opt that term to mean like, okay, when I read this, like I read this as like there will be a reserve or a stockpile, and like, right now what is yet to be decided is will it be Bitcoin only, or will it be Bitcoin and other things? And I think it all comes down to the criteria that they develop to view these digital assets through, and they're gonna have a hard time figuring out like what's the dividing line of like what makes something legit and what doesn't. And so I think like the path of least resistance is just going to end up being like, is it Bitcoin or is it like a top 10 market cap thing? Like, so it's going to be like, I don't know how they're going to figure that out. I do know that one place I think that the EO over delivered as it relates to the stockpile. And stockpile is an important word. We call the strategic Bitcoin reserve. The president and the president's people have always been very clear it's a stockpile. And so SBR kind of has become a meme. And so I keep using it because it's a meme, but it's a stockpile. Like, so the working group actually is assembling like the most credible, legitimate people that are financial regulators in the country and pulling them together in one place. It reminds me of like the National Economic Council, but for crypto. And so like that is actually a very legit working group, way more legit than what we were expecting. And, when you look at who constitutes that group, like we have people like Lutnick, we have people like Sachs, we have people like Besant, we have people like Adkins. We have a good number of people that are not like novices as it relates to Bitcoin or digital assets. And so like I think that there are a lot of people at the table who are going to have influence on what this final report is, that have a perspective that's very aligned with the Bitcoin community. So I think that we're going to end up with a positive outcome as it relates to like what Bitcoiners want. And you know, as like far as everything I've been told from the administration and you know, from my points of contact, like the reserve is happening. So this is like this is the process by which we create the necessary justification for why we did it, how we did it.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. By the way, the working group, to your point, it is not, and I think there will be others that are externally facing, but it's not like CEOs of protocols and crypto chains. This is the Treasury Secretary, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Commerce, Homeland Security, OMB, National Security, Office of Science and Technology, Chair of the SEC and CFTC. Yeah, and by the way, you know who's not on that list are any banking regulators. No banking regulators at all. I'm pretty sure that was very deliberate. I think
the Fed.
Yeah, or the Fed. That's what I mean. I think they have disqualified themselves from talking about Bitcoin, it appears. I think after everything that went down with SAB 121 and all of that stuff, I think they are basically don't have a seat at the table. And just to set the stage, like on the stockpile, right? Just starting with holding, right? I tweeted a list right after this came out of just, this is what Arkham, an intelligence company, says. I don't know that they cover every chain. So like, I don't know if they have Solana or XRP, but the stockpile is the current stockpile as they have today, seized assets, is something like 97% Bitcoin anyway, right? Like it's 20 billion of Bitcoin. Probably, by the way, like a lot of that gets returned to Bitfinex, but it's billions of dollars of Bitcoin. And then ETH is 100.
Big slug has been sold from my understanding. So yeah, I think that's something that we're waiting to get some feedback from a letter Lummis wrote to figure out exactly how much Bitcoin we actually have. So, you know, and I one takeaway I think from the EO was like, people were like, oh, well, like it's going to be the Bitcoin that the digital assets already held by the government. Actually doesn't say that. It says it potentially can come from that. So they left it extremely open-ended. Like the end state of like what this EO says, like it's a jump ball right now. And I think there's
this doesn't say, it absolutely does not rule out purchases, to be clear, at all. Like it does not, and it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't even say that they should be derived from that. They could theoretically sell all of this and then buy it again or buy different stuff. Yeah.
So if I was like if I didn't have a day job and this was like my full-time focus, which I feel like it is sometimes, I'd be saying, okay, jump ball, we have 6 months to lobby the people who are on this working group to really help give input on like how this should be structured and how they should add to the stockpile and why the only digital asset that qualifies is going to be Bitcoin. And like, you know, there's like there's a world here where we end up with, in 6 months' time, a strategic Bitcoin stockpile that is actually actively acquiring Bitcoin. That's blessed by all the most important regulators. Like that's a feasible outcome. So it's like the process is influenceable if people get involved, but it's influenceable in the other direction too. Like, hey, what constitutes a digital asset? Like that could become a wide net if a lot of people get involved in this process. So
for sure. And they hold, they hold like Tron, Link, Band, Aave, right there. So, but let alone, I think the people that everyone was getting. What's funny? Sorry.
I saw something really funny about, what incentives does it create if like the only way to get into the stockpile is if it's proceeds from like confiscation from the marshals. And it's like, okay, like, chains will be trying to figure out how to get criminal enterprises to like start using their assets so that they end up in the stockpile a couple years later.
Yeah. I mean that. Yeah, I saw that. I saw people talking about airdropping coins on this government ETH wallet that Arkham tracks and a bunch of other dumb stuff. I do think it is highly, even if they evaluate 500 coins, I think it's very, very unlikely that any, or certainly not many beyond Bitcoin actually meet any reasonable criteria as being relevant to hold for the government. I think for the Bitcoin maxis who are watching and our friends.
And I think based on what they walk away with the analysis, like the knock-on implications of that analysis could become pretty significant to like the wider landscape. Like if they go and do an analysis and they say, oh, well, we've determined that like, we only support digital assets with a certain type of consensus mechanism because we want to make sure that the assets can't be rugged, or if they make some like just like subjective decision about the criteria, like that's the U.S. government and the top people speaking about like what's legit and what's not legit. It'll change the whole landscape. So
you're totally right. In fact, there was some people were pointing this out in the second section of this order. There's a definitions, and it says the term blockchain means any technology where data is, and then there's blah, 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 blah. But one of them says composed of source code that is publicly available, which is interesting because there are blockchains and certainly applications on blockchains that use closed source code, right, and not open source. So they are starting to make, like, I agree that could come out of this. They could say, look, well, we considered token XYZ, but it wasn't decentralized enough, or it was controlled by a centralized entity, and we certainly that can't be in our stockpile, right? Like that is an interesting secondary effect that could come from this.
No, it's like a Howey test, but created by the Treasury to determine like what's good enough for the U.S. government's balance sheet, and like that has implications, and
it does.
Yeah.
And that could, because if you think about, there was the speech that Bill Hinman gave when he was at the SEC in summer 2017, where he came up with the idea that if an asset became sufficiently decentralized, it could transition from a security to a commodity. And although I think Gensler kind of repudiated that idea when he was in charge, this was a lot of projects ended up getting built sort of based on that guidance. And you could see something similar happen here, where aside from the existing ones that get excluded, whatever sort of guidance or criteria they propose could end up forming the basis of how the industry is built going forward also. Because you'd say, well, why would I build it this way if it rules me out of being held in the stockpile?
Yeah. No, and I think this criteria will get adopted for other things too. And I think my guess is like, how does this affect the Bitcoin price? I think once everything cools down from like the market digests this, there's going to be massive palace intrigue created around every little minutia detail about like what the members of this working group are saying, and like how, like who's in and who's out. And like I think like people are going to really start to, like, as we get closer and closer to the delivery of this report, like you're going to start seeing more and more speculation, and the speculation is going to like fuel people speculating on the price. And so I actually think it's like this delay actually can kick the sell the news event of like, okay, now we know what is fact. Well, now we have just 6 months of just straight up like anything is possible. Like let the market speculate. So I think it's going to be a positive catalyst for the price.
Yeah, I think it is too, and I agree that the uncertainty does create opportunity. Whereas, I mean, let's say they came out and did like BTC policies proposal on day one. That would be great. That's buy pressure. It's if they bought a bunch of Bitcoin right away somehow, right? But then it would be over, right? And then you possibly digest that. This is sort of like, dude, the game is still going.
Yeah. So I do think the negatives of it is like, because they watered down digital assets, then they watered down the focus on Bitcoin. I do think that reduces the nation state FOMO, like the second order effects FOMO. Like it makes this seem, well, from my perspective, it makes it seem like it's less of a geopolitical focus on Bitcoin or prioritization of Bitcoin. Maybe that's not how this is interpreted by like normie world, because normie world may say, oh my gosh, they're convening like the most important people in the government to talk about their digital assets reserve. And like, it's only ridiculous Bitcoiners that see that as like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? So, I'm interested to see how the world interprets this, but my instinct is that, taking away from the Bitcoin focused element of it reduces the momentum globally for follow on SBRs. That's just my take.
I think that's fair. You mentioned, I want to go back to something, the crypto ball in a second, and a little bit about inauguration weekend. We were both I guess you up there, me down there. But before that, you said, so we have about 6 months before this thing is presented to the president, not just on the stockpile, but on all the other stuff they're being asked to recommend, the presidential working group. Within that 6 months, though, is Bitcoin 2025 in late May in Las Vegas. What can you tease with us on that so far, David? You're planning for that, and you
cooking.
you had DJT there last time,
Yeah. No, I'm trying to outdo ourselves for Vegas, and I'm hopeful that maybe we can get this working group to kick into high gear, and maybe we can get them to deliver on this report ahead of schedule.
That's true, by the way. They have until 6 months to deliver it. Doesn't mean they have to wait that whole 6 months. That's true.
So I mean, our conference is at the end of 5 months, basically. So it'd be great if we could maybe make some news in Vegas with this. So we'll see.
Vegas is a great choice. You guys have been in San Francisco and then Miami for several years, and then Nashville last year. What went into the thinking behind Vegas as the choice this year?
Well, we want to keep changing cities, and there's really not that many venues that can support an event of our size. And so, you kind of go through the list pretty quickly as you start working through the convention centers. And then we think that like this year's going to be a big one. And then we think like next one's going to be the behemoth. And so like, there's like, if we're going to have a 60, 70,000 person event next year, like, Vegas is like the only place to really be able to do that. And so like we wanted to pick a place that we could set up shop for a little bit and go really big.
Enormous number of hotel rooms and convention spaces and places for side dinners and whatever. I actually went for the first time ever just last year to Vegas. I went for MicroStrategy's conference. I spoke there. I'd never been there.
Wow.
It was huge though. Tons of space.
I think it'll be a nice thing for our West Coast friends, because after leaving California, Miami is a long ways to go. So
True.
Next year is shaping up to be our biggest event ever. So I think our goal is 30 to 40,000 attendees, and we'll see where we shake out. But like we are way ahead of schedule across the board. It's going to be crazy.
Was Nashville the biggest one of them all, or was maybe like 22 or maybe
22 was the biggest of them all, but like 5,000 of the attendees only came to the music festival for 22. And so like on a pure attendee basis, like to the actual conference, the 22 and 24 were roughly the same size.
Wow. All right, let's talk a little bit about inauguration weekend. You and David Sachs, really Bitcoin Inc. threw the ball. You guys were the event partner and also co-host or sponsor or something like that. There was some tiers of names of these, but effectively the event put on by you and David Sachs. Is that right?
Yeah. And first off, I just want to say David's a very smart guy and a great executor, and I didn't know him going into this at all. And so, I still don't know him very well, but you get to know someone and their team when you're like building something together, and like there's a lot of like crises you're dealing with, etc. Very impressed with David, and very bullish on his ability to rise to the occasion of what the country needs from him, because he has a huge task on his plate. I mean, like there's enough just to do with crypto, much less like the AI side. And he's a hard worker and he's smart. So with the ball though, I mean, first off, I've been told the ball was not only the best party in DC this inauguration, but the best party at any inauguration that anyone can remember. So we went hard, and I thought it was a lot of fun. We had a little over 2,000 people attend. And it was lots of people from our industry, but it was also, top tech CEOs. It was, Fortune 50 company CEOs. It was some of the richest people in the country. And then a ton of people from the cabinet, senators, Speaker Johnson. I mean, a bunch of people. And so it really felt like a coming out party for like our industry. But I think actually what was like the biggest eye-opening moment for me was the VP dinner that happened, I think 2 nights later.
Yeah. The next night, Saturday night. Yep.
Yeah, next night. Yeah, and I saw Mike there.
Yeah.
Were you there with him?
No, Tyler was there with him.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I saw Tyler.
Yeah.
So, like that event felt like wow, like not, we're not just like being invited to the big kid, like to the adult table from like the kids table. Like we're sitting at like the head of the table, and like looking around the room, there was probably like 50, 60 tables in the room, and like there was like 8 people to a table, or 10 people to a table. Like it seemed like half the tables had a CEO of a Bitcoin or crypto company there. I saw, Brian from Coinbase was there, Matt from Paradigm was there, Mike from Galaxy was there, Charles from Itbit was there, or
Paxos.
I
saw Fred Thiel was there.
Yeah. Mike Belshie was there. Michael Saylor was there. The list just goes on, and it was just like, and at my table, like to my right is the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. I'll just dox him. The CEO of Anheuser-Busch. Sorry if you see this. Now people know you're a Trump donor. And then like across from me is the CEO of Google. And then to the left of me is Tulsi Gabbard and her husband. And it's just like, okay, like wow, I feel like unqualified to be here. But then I look over and it's like the same thing at every other table with a Bitcoin around it. It's just like, wow, they spread us out so that we could have maximum shill radius to shill crypto and shill Bitcoin. And so I don't know. I thought it was like just a powerful moment. And I'm sure all these CEOs that were there from normal industries were like, what in the hell is happening? Like, how did all these people get in here?
Well, because they could have put you guys like in the corner, but they didn't at all. I mean, it seems that's one of the messages we're taking away from this is also the way that this executive order is written. I mean, I actually love this, strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. Like, he is selling Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain technology as front row seat technology, which it is, by the way, clearly. But like, you're not at the kids' table, literally.
Yeah, no, it's like us and AI are the top priorities.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it was a surreal experience, and it was just like, oh wow, like what's happening here? Like this is like a beginning. This is a beginning. I think we're going to get lots more from this administration. I think we're going to get something in every single bill, every single piece of legislation that goes through. I think we're going to get something. I think the reconciliation bill coming up, there's big things we're going to get. The tax bill coming up, there's big things we're going to get. So I would just expect we need to have like a dog in the fight on every bill that comes through Congress, and we need to be getting some things delivered for our industry, for us to support certain legislation, et cetera. So I think there's a lot more coming on that front. And then, dude, I think just like looking forward is like this is, there was a moment where the internet went from like a fun nerd thing to like, wow, this has like real political like power. Like maybe, I don't know when that moment was, the NDAA or whatever it was. But like, it feels like our industry has crossed that threshold, or is just crossing that threshold. And like 4 years from now, we're not going to be at the same place we're at now. Like the internet didn't stop growing for 4 years after it crossed that threshold. It just got bigger. And like, it feels like that's what's happening to us. Like 4 years from now, we're just going to have more political power. And then like 4 years after that, more political power. And so I really think like the sky's the limit in terms of like what levers of democracy we're going to be able to pull to achieve our ideological and commercial goals.
All right, well, let's leave it there. David Bailey, thank you for your work on behalf of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin industry, David. And well, I guess I'll see you in Vegas if I don't see you sooner. It's going to be a great party.
Dude, it's good to see you in DC. Thank you, Galaxy, for the support. And yeah, I think this this journey is just beginning. So buckle up.
There you have it. David Bailey, CEO and founder of BTC Inc. David, thank you so much.
Cool. Later.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you to our guest, David Bailey, CEO and founder of BTC Inc., and our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.